Welcome to the Journey into Islamic Pattern, virtual programming of the Ismaili Jamaat Khana and Center. Under the guidance of His Highness the Aga Khan, who is the 49th hereditary Imam of the Ismaili Muslims and a direct descendant of Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, the Ismaili Jamaat Khana and Center serves as a place of gathering, learning, and exchange. In addition to providing prayer and assembly space for Shia Ismaili Muslims, the center is also a space for fostering an appreciation of pluralism and for enhancing relationship among faith communities, government, and civil society. Events at the center aspire to stimulate the intellect, encourage dialogue, and celebrate cultural diversity. In the words of His Highness the Aga Khan, pluralist societies are not accidents of history. They are a product of enlightened education and continuous investment by governments and all of civil society in recognizing and celebrating the diversity of the world's peoples. Rooted in the rich tapestry of Islamic heritage and traditions, the architect of the centers identify a community that is at once confident of its past and modern in its outlook. Through their design and function, the centers facilitate the promotion of cultural, educational, and social programs from the broadest non-denominational perspectives within the ethical framework of Islam. In that spirit, we are excited to offer Journey into Islamic Pattern with Richard Henry. In this illustrated talk, artist and geometer Richard Henry will reveal his very personal relationship to the art of Islamic geometric pattern from his early travels in the Islamic world and his fascination with the contemplative dimension of the art. He will outline his approach to the language of symmetry and how this feeds into his own artistic work. He will also discuss his educational work and research, which has spanned several countries, and the revival of the Islamic geometric art as a contemporary practice. With that, I present to you Richard Henry.
Thank you very much, Almas, for that introduction, and thank you to the Ismaili Jamaat Khana and Center for inviting me to make this presentation to you today. I'm very honored, and I'd be delighted to share you my thoughts and share my journey into this unique tradition. So I'm going to just give a brief overview of my kind of journey and experience in this art, and also some sort of insights and a way of thinking about these designs, a contemplative approach to working with these patterns. And this feeds into my own artistic practice and also a lot of the educational work that I've been doing over the last 15 or 20 years now almost. Perhaps if we could start with the first slide. Okay, so this evening, I think we've actually got a solar eclipse that will be witnessed in some parts of the world. It will be an annular solar eclipse where a ring of fire will appear around the moon. And this is, I like to start with this particular image here of this solar eclipse where the moon is obscuring the face of the sun, because it gives us a wonderful image for geometry. I think when we think about geometry these days, we tend to think of it in a more abstract and, well, sort of quantitative manner. But if you think about the word itself, geometry, it literally means geo-earth, metry, measure. And that idea, the etymology, goes back to land surveying techniques associated with the ancient Egyptians, where they would have to redemarcate the land after the annual flooding of the Nile. So this relationship of earth measure, it relates to a very intimate relationship between man or woman and the earth. And this image of the solar eclipse is a wonderful image of geometry because you have this very clear center and a circumference here. You can see the sun's corona here during the solar eclipse, and this wonderful manifestation of the circle in nature is this beautiful symbol that one finds across cultures of the undifferentiated source of all things. Can we move to the second slide? So this is an image painting by the great by Senge, who was a Zen monk. And this image is sometimes referred to as the archetypes. And it's said that Senge, 15th century Japanese Zen monk, he went into a meditative state and he had a vision. He had a vision of the underlying order of the cosmos. And he said it comes from these three fundamental forms: the circle, which within his system represented the heavens, and the square or rectangle, which because of the cardinal directions represented the earth, and then the triangle as a mediator between heaven and earth represented man. So this particular painting image was drawn, as you can see, with one loading of the brush, because you can see it becomes progressively lighter as we move from right to left. And it's this this wonderful sense of heaven, earth, and man visualized within these fundamental geometric forms. Can we move to the next slide? Now, one particular city where you see this this manifestation of these archetypal forms, particularly in terms of the domes and the sphericality of the domes and the linearity of the minarets, is within the city of Istanbul. And this is the mosque of Ortaköy. And I've put this image in here because in many ways, this Istanbul is where my journey into this tradition began. Almost exactly 30 years ago, I finished university. I was a philosophy graduate, and I went traveling. I went traveling for a number of years. And one of the first places that I went to was Istanbul. And so this was a very familiar image to me, the mosque here in Ortaköy. This was the first time that I'd spent time in a Muslim country. And I just became really captivated by initially just the geometries of the city profile of Istanbul in terms of these wonderful silhouettes of the buildings by Sinan, who was an architect that I was aware of actually long before I'd gone to Istanbul. And he was one of the catalysts in actually making me want to go and spend time in this city. I've put this image here just to give a sense of that way in which this city holds this very, very clear expression of geometric order. And when you start to go into these mosques, you start to see the pattern and decorative motifs within the walls and upon the walls, and they create this wonderful sort of contemplative ambience, and they take the mind towards this more, what you might call a more meditative state. Let's have a look at the next image. Now, this is a quotation from the Ikhwan al-Safa, from a text called the Rasail, and this is a translation by the great Persian scholar Sayyid Hussein Nasr. And I've put it in here because it gives us some insight into how these patterns were thought about at the time at which you might say there was an incredible expression of geometric genius within the Islamic world. And they write, "Know, O brother, that the study of sensible geometry leads to skill in all practical arts, while the study of intelligible geometry leads to skill in the intellectual arts, because this science is one of the gates through which we move to knowledge of the essence of the soul, and that is the root of knowledge." Now, just a couple of things that I would highlight there is this contrast between the sensible geometry and the practical arts, or the relationship between the two. When they say sensible geometry, they mean how geometry presents itself to the senses. But that's contrasted with intelligible geometry, which is how the pure forms of geometry present themselves to the mind as pure archetypal forms. So what it's suggesting is the act of reenacting geometry, drawing geometry, actually takes the mind from the outward sensible forms to the world of archetypal forms. So it acts as a kind of bridge between the unmanifest and the manifest. And I find that a very, very exciting idea. And it's one which starts to become quite clear, particularly when you start working with reconstructing these designs and using the traditional tools of a compass and straight edge. The next slide, please. And we find some of the greatest expressions of geometric genius within the Iranian tradition. These images here, the next couple of images, are from my very first visit to Iran, which was about 14 years ago. And this is in the northern city of Kashan. And this is the bazaar in Kashan. And it's got this wonderful domed roof with this extraordinary vaulting system. You can see these two oculi here, these two openings, one in the form of a dodecagon, another one with an octagonal opening, and these are seamlessly moving together within three-dimensional space. Can we have a look at the next image? And here's a close-up. So basically the oculus, the light comes in and it moves around the interior of this dome, a bit like the movement of the light around the interior of the Pantheon in Rome. And as you can see, it starts to pick out these lozenge shapes. And if you look very closely, you can see that these are built up out of brick patterns, which are alternately glazed and unglazed. So you get this sense of light being refracted into the geometry, but also both being absorbed and reflected as it comes down to earth, which is which serves as a beautiful kind of symbol of light, as a vehicle of illumination. Let's have a look at the next image. So the traditional tools for constructing these patterns, of course, one can construct geometry in many different ways, but and many people can do these designs on the computer, and I'm not averse to using a computer myself, but I always come back to the primary tools of geometry, of the straight edge, the ruler, and the compass. And if we look at the next slide, we can see the compass a bit closer up here. So this is from the Museum of Islamic Art in Doha. And this is a gold and steel compass, 19th century Turkish, with wonderful kind of biomorphic designs on there. And the compass is a very interesting tool from a symbolic point of view. My own teacher, Keith Critchlow, who sadly passed away earlier this year, would talk about the symbolism of the two legs of the compass. And he would refer to the one leg which stays fixed as representing the ontological axis. So this is the axis which links heaven with earth. And obviously from that singular point, the whole of the designs unfold, and that singular point could be a symbol of unity. And the leg which moves round and demarcates the space, that symbolizes exteriority. So you have this sense of relating the exterior multiplicity back towards unity in the action of the compass. Can I show the next image? And there's some people ask, well, how far back does this sort of symbolic way of looking at geometry go? And I've put in a couple of sort of poetic references here, because I think there's actually, when you look into the record, there's this, you do find some quite interesting instances of poetic meditations upon the compass. This is from the English medieval metaphysical poet John Donne, from Valediction Forbidding Morning. He writes, "If they be two, they are two so as stiff twin compasses are two. Thy soul, the fixed foot, makes no show to move, but doth if the other do." Let's have a look at the next slide. Now, there's an image here of the whirling dervish. Now, this idea of the one leg of the compass which stays fixed, representing the ontological axis, and then the other leg moving round, symbolizing the relationship to exteriority, is something which is actually encoded within the actions of the whirling dervish. Now, I remember I was at a Mevlevi Hane, a Rumi house in Istanbul about 7 or 8 years ago, and I was speaking to the master of the lodge, and he talked exactly about this symbolism, talking about how that the one fixed leg symbolized this vertical axis linking heaven and earth. And he said that the person doing the movement would concentrate on the points, the uppermost point of that axis, and that would be marked by the pole star within the ceiling decoration of the room where the ritual is taking place. So I thought that was a very, very interesting connection, and certainly resonates with this symbolism of the compass. Let's have a look at the next image. And this is another symbolic, poetic envisaging of the compass. This is from Shah Nematollah, and he writes in this poem, "The point appeared in the circle and was not, but it was the dot that the circle begot. The point appears as a circle as it revolves in the eyes of him who draws, in the eyes of him who a circle draws. When the point completed the circle, its beginning and end were one. When the compass did the circle complete, it was wrapped up and rested its feet. Without existence not being are we who are not, and you existence free. I said the whole world was his dream, and then I saw that his dream was he." Let's move to the next image. So this is actually the temple or the shrine to the poet who wrote those words. I actually visited this in 2006. This was long before I came across the poem, and this is in Mahan, and it's a very beautiful setting. This is southeastern Iran, heading towards the Afghan border. And there's this beautiful shrine to the poet. Let's have a look at the next image. This is one of the most famous domes in Iran. It was under restoration when I was there. You can see the famous blue dome on the right there with these two towers in front of it. And then the next image. It's got some very beautiful vaulted interiors and decoration on the inside. And another image, as you can see here. And so there's, yeah, I just wanted to show that connection or the context of the poet and those words. Let's move to the next image. Now, I'm not sure how clearly you can see this. This was, I've put this one in here because it's, I took this photo when I was visiting Fez about 7 or 8 years ago. And Fez is somewhere that I visit regularly, and we take groups to explore the sort of historical context. What's wonderful about Morocco is there's still a living tradition of Islamic art as a practice there. And this wonderful vase here, you can see that the craftsman just there to the left, he's holding actually quite a primitive compass in his right hand, and he's marking out the surface of the design. So it's just this still a very fluent extension of the body, the compass. Can we look at the next image? And this is from, again, another place from my travels, the Sala de los Abencerrajes, which is in the Alhambra. And what you're looking up into here is this wonderful vaulted ceiling. This is in gypsum, carved plaster. And these are sometimes referred to as mukanas, these stalactite forms. And they're unique to Islamic architecture, and they mark a way of transitioning from the cardinal four walls of a building to the heavenly domed vault. And this particular one, as we look up into it, it's got this figure of the 8-pointed star, which is sometimes referred to as the khatam, the seal. And here the khatam is projected into 3 dimensions. But if we look at the next slide, you can see that we've got the khatam tessellated in 2 dimensions. And this is an interesting tessellation here. You have the alternation of 2 complementary shapes. You have the khatam and the cross here. And these are tiles from Deramin in Iran. And they've got these, you've got these, the integration of the 3 classical elements of Islamic art, the geometry, the arabesque forms, the biomorphic forms, and the calligraphy, which are along the perimeter of the figures. Now, this particular design, it's often referred to as the breath of the compassionate. But that designation is actually quite a recent designation. I think it's probably only goes back to Lale Bakhtiar's book Sufi from the 1970s. But the expression itself is much older, and it's attributed to Ibn Arabi, who was the great Andalus mystic, who's one of those great figures who he moved from the west to the east. He was born in Andalusia, spent time teaching in Fez, and I believe died in Damascus. And he wrote that the world comes into being upon the breath of God, upon the breath of the compassionate. And this idea of the breath being associated with Islamic patterns, and this very particular one, is to do with the alternation of two shapes, because you can see the khatam shape as an expansion, and you can see the cross shape as a contraction. So that expansion and contraction is seen as a kind of an inward breath and an outward breath. Let's move on to the next slide. Now, people will often ask, what is distinct about Islamic geometric patterns? I mean, geometry is universal. There are geometric designs in the, the Greco-Roman, Byzantine traditions. And some people will say, well, there's no such thing as Islamic geometric patterns. They're just inheriting the earlier designs. And I think there's an element of truth in that, but I think there is a sense that within the first couple of centuries of Islam, there's a kind of conceptual leap that seems to take place. And I think it's quite nicely illustrated with these drawings. These are drawings by my own teacher, the geometer Paul Marchant. What he's done here, he's rotated the breath of the compassionate design through 45 degrees. And then in the image below, highlighted, made bold some of the outlines of that pattern, being quite selective in that outlining. And then if we go to the next slide, the subgrid is taken away and you start to get this very distinct pattern, which doesn't really have any corollary in, say, Greco-Roman or Byzantine art, but it's actually something quite new. So what's happening, and this is from the Alhambra, just outside the room of the ambassadors, this is what they call it's a zilij pattern, which is cut ceramic tiles, or alicatado, as they would say in Andalusia. But it's this new design, which is unique. It's as I say, it's an expression of this new kind of vision which is starting to emerge, where they're using the geometry or the subgrids, which may have appeared in earlier traditions, as a kind of generative resource to create new designs which had not been seen before. Let's go to the next slide. Yeah, these are my own photos from the Hall of the Ambassadors, where you can see that pattern. If we go to the next one, we've got a close-up of it. So you can see that alternation of that shape. So you need to look at that, and then you need to realize that the breath of the compassionate design is underneath that as a kind of hidden subgrid. And being aware of these different levels of design, I think, is one of the very, very exciting aspects, and also one of the very deeply meditative designs, because it's like you're becoming aware of the different veils upon reality and the underlying order which is made manifest through the geometry. Let's have a look at the next image. So this is crossing the water to Meknes in Morocco, and this language starting to become very, very sophisticated now. This is a zilij panel, so cut ceramic tiles, a tile mosaic with these individually cut shapes, and it's all based upon eightfold symmetry. So by eightfold, I simply mean an eightfold division of the circle, which will give you the octagon, it will give you an 8-pointed star, and the khatam, the figure that we discussed previously. And different breakdowns of the khatam will give you a whole family of shapes which will, always to my mind, quite miraculously fit together to tessellate and make these wonderful designs which have these different levels of self-similarity. So you find the same elements occurring at different levels within the design. And, it's this element of self-similarity is something that we find within sort of fractal patterns. Let's have a look at the next design. So this is also from the Moorish tradition. This is from the Paris Mosque. And it's a beautiful 48-petal mosaic in zilij. And this is something which is quite distinct about the Moroccan tradition, is they've got these wonderful multi-petal rosettes. So it's like these sort of blooms and sort of starbursts, which are just erupting through the design. Let's have a look at the next image. Now, there's always this very close resonance, I feel, between the geometric patterns, which are often referred to as rosettes. So they're seen as these kind of like flowers or floral openings. And within the world of flowers and plants, the geometry, there's one wonderful sense of geometric opening and very simple number symmetries that one finds within the world of flowers. And particularly fivefold symmetry is very much an interesting one. Number 5 is a key number within the Fibonacci series, and 5 is very much the signature of a living form. So, I mean, a human being has 5 fingers, 5 on each hand, 5 toes on each foot, and has 5 extremities. It's something which is there. It's almost like the signature of life. The DNA spiral is like 2 pentagons overlaid. It has this quite interesting fivefold symmetry, and the golden mean is incorporated into that. Let's have a look at the next image. So, yeah, as I was saying, when we look at the botanical world, you find these patterns of natural symmetries. But even when we look into the heavens, we also find these designs. This is a pattern described by John Martineau, who was a colleague of mine, who's a wonderful geometer, and he did these like computer simulations of the movements of the planets in the solar system in relationship to each other and also in relationship to the sun. What you have here is the mean orbit. That's taking the orbit as an average, as a circle, because typically the orbits will be elliptical. But if you resolve it into a circle, then you start to get these quite interesting patterns emerging. So, for example, you have the sun at the center of this image, and then in the next ring out, you have Venus. That's the alchemical glyph for Venus. It's like a circle with a cross beneath it. And then the outermost ring there is the Earth. And what John has done is to draw a straight line between the Earth and Venus every day over an 8-year period. And it creates this wonderful sort of fivefold rosette. And this particular pattern of movement has been known about since Babylonian times. And indeed, the pentagram or the 5-pointed star has been a symbol of Venus since that period. Let's have a look at the next image. Yes, so this is a photo that I took on my first trip to Iran. And this is from the Taj al-Mulk dome, which is built in 1088, as it says that's in the Christian calendar. I think if you go to the next slide, there's a close-up of that dome. Yes, so you're looking up into this north dome of the Jami Mosque in Isfahan. So this is the older mosque in the city. And you can see that it's got this wonderful fivefold rosette design, surrounded by pentagons and incorporating these rhombic forms. And it's incorporated into the actual brick ribbing of the dome. So it's not like they've imposed or inscribed this pattern onto the dome. It's actually incorporated into the structure. And this is apparently the earliest example of this integration of the of patterned geometry into a masonry structure like this. And it's believed that it was the person who oversaw the construction of this was the great poet and mathematician Omar Khayyam, who was resident in Isfahan at the time. Let's have a look at the next image. Yes, so again, this idea of this resonance between Islamic patterns and natural patterns in the world. These are some vortex patterns in water. And if you go to the next slide, you can see how often these sort of very natural movements within nature are often replicated within Islamic designs. This is an alicatado cut tile design from the Court of Myrtles in the Alhambra. And it's this beautiful zilij pattern It's actually a very simple isometric grid, this design. It's one that I often teach with beginners, but it's got this wonderful sort of movement and dynamism there, very much like those vortex patterns that one finds within water and within other contexts within nature. I'm not sure how clearly you can see this one. This is a painted ceiling panel from the Palais Bahia in Marrakesh in Morocco. And it's one of my favorite images here because it's in a tradition called zouak, which is a kind of paint on wood. But the binder of the paint is in well, traditionally it would be in egg tempera. But when these are restored now, they tend to do them in acrylic, which is quite disappointing. The thing about having the egg tempera binder is you get this wonderful sense of semi-opacity to the design. And as the piece weathers, then it develops this wonderful kind of slightly ghostly translucent quality here. This particular design has a lovely Moorish 36-petal rosette surrounded by 16-petal rosettes. But because it's quite an old piece and the paint and the binder is starting to fade, the design starts to disappear, and it's almost like it's disappearing behind a veil. And so when you look at it, you start to become aware of the order, but the order is always somehow escaping you, and it takes on this wonderful kind of ghostly or ethereal presence. And I really enjoy that with this particular tradition, when you look at these designs where the mind's starting to seek out the order, but it's something which always escapes from one. Let's have a look at the next image. So this is an illustration that I did for a book some years ago now, where I was exploring this idea of the pattern emerging from a kind of a hidden order, or kind of a sort of a subgrid. So you can see that this design is just coming out of the circle, but there's a kind of subgrid there, and then there's what you might call the kind of more fleshly part of the kind of cosmos, or the design appearing on the design there. So I wanted to give a sense of this transition from the unmanifest to the manifest here. And this is a design from the, very famously, it appears in Syria, in the Umayyad Mosque in Damascus, which is a place that I visited about 20 years ago, long before the troubles in that country. And I've been very interested in the particular modules which are hidden, which constitute this design, and how those can be reassembled to generate new patterns. Let's have a look at the next image. So this is some of my analytical work here. I'm, for the last 15 years, initially at the British Museum and now more broadly, I've been teaching how to construct these designs using the traditional tools of compass and straight edge. And this is one of my drawings which shows you a 20-fold rosette here emerging, and being surrounded by these 10-fold rosettes. And it's a very interesting practice to try and see how all of these designs, they can unfold from the circle. And it's as if you could trace all of them back to this singular point of unity from which they all unfold. Let's have a look at the next image. And this is actually the same design. This is a Zilij piece. It's almost the same design. It's a slight alteration on that, but the subgrid is the same. This is a very beautiful Zilij panel from the Bou Inania Madrasa in Fez in Morocco, which is a Marinid madrasa, so from the early medieval period. And it's got these wonderful 10-fold rosettes and beautiful variations with this gorgeous woven tracery. The weave is something which is very characteristic of Islamic geometric patterns, and the weave is said to sort of symbolize the kind of the warp and weft of the cosmos. Let's have a look at another image here. And there's an analytical drawing of the same. I believe this one is actually now part of the collection of the Museum of Geometric Art in Dallas, where it was exhibited some years ago. Let's go to the next image. Now, this is a photo that I took in Iran. It's from the Vakil Mosque, the Regent's Mosque in Shiraz, which is the city of Hafiz, as I'm sure many of you know, the great poet. And I've put it here because it's got this wonderful, it's a tenfold design, but you can see it's, earlier I talked about this fractal element, these, this self-similar aspect that one finds within these patterns. And it's very much in presence here. You can see that you have the decagram, the 10-pointed star. It's broken down into these smaller constituent shapes. So it's always about trying to see the different shapes existing at different scales and how they contain themselves at many different scales. The kite is a particularly significant figure here. So if you can see the ring of 10 kites around the central 10-pointed star, and the kite within Iran, they refer to that as the Toranj. I think if I show the next image, I've taken the color away now. And it's interesting when you take the color away, you can start to see this sort of this fractal-like quality to the pattern. And it's almost like being drawn into this sort of wonderful multi-level vortex. Let's go to the next image. When I was a student at the Princeton School of Traditional Arts in London about 20 years ago, I was very captivated by this whole family of designs. And this is a piece that I did back in those days. This is it's an oak table, a 5-legged oak table, and it has this tile mosaic based on patterns from Iran. And it's combining cut stone with ceramic pieces. So the sort of the inset star is a ceramic piece, and the large, those other elements, the alternating light and dark pieces are natural stone. Can we see the next image? And there's a close-up of one of the ceramic pieces, beautiful 10-fold rosette. And if we look at the next one, so this particular family of patterns, there's a certain amount of controversy about how they can be drawn, how they can be recreated, and also how they were created historically. And this is an image here of the what's referred to as the Topkapi scroll. So this is a 30-meter scroll which is kept in the Topkapi Museum in Istanbul. It's not, you need special permission to view it. But it's actually a Persian pattern book from the medieval period, and it's been a source of great interest because it gives you an insight into some of the underlying order of the designs. So if we can look at the next image, you can see this is a typical page from the Topkapi scroll. And you can see here how you've got the different constituent shapes. So you can see that there's shapes on one level, and then then a subgrid of larger shapes in a different line, and then even still larger grid there. So there's at least 3 levels that one can see within this design, which are all perfectly integrated. And it's been speculated that these were the way, this method is often referred to as the polygonal method of geometric pattern analysis. And it's a text like the Topkapi scroll is it's wonderful evidence of its historical use in creating these designs. Can we look at another image? And here's another close-up. So you can see the decagon, the 10-point, the 10-sided polygon tessellated together, and then you've got these little, I don't know if you can see them, but they're leaning this diagonal angle, and they're these little bottle shapes, which are often referred to as sormedan. Often, all of these shapes have particular names. Sormedan refers to the cosmetics container, which that women would use for decorating their eyes. So the sorme is the coal, and dan is this is Farsi, the Persian language. The suffix dan just means a container. So sormedan, it's the container of the coal or the sorme. Yeah, so that's that very characteristic bottle shape that one finds within this family of patterns. Let's go to the next image. And there's another one. The sormedan is very prominent on the image on the right there. And what's interesting about these designs is within this particular family, they fit within these very particular modules, which have very specific proportions related to the golden mean. They're not golden rectangles, but they do have what you might call golden properties, which I can talk about a little bit more later. But it's quite interesting in the way that they seem asymmetric, particularly the one on the right, and yet these will tessellate to make continuous designs which can be woven. So there's a wonderful kind of sort of fractal harmony in operation when one starts working with these designs. Let's have a look at the next image. Now, this is from the tomb of Itimad-ud-Dawla, which is in northern India, in Agra. And this is the building which is opposite the Taj Mahal, and it's sometimes referred to as the Baby Taj. And in many ways, well, for me, it's actually a far more interesting building than the Taj Mahal. It's less visited, but it's got some unique geometries within it, some very interesting and unique in the Islamic world tenfold designs. And it's got this screen here where you can see the subgrid of decagons with pentagons and then a kind of squashed hexagon shape. Now, this subgrid traditionally would be hidden, and you would just see the final motifs. So it's quite an interesting case to find the subgrid exposed here within this Jali screen. So this is a pierced screen carving. Let's have a look at the next image. Yes, so when you understand this relationship between the subgrid and the motifs, it gives you the opportunity to actually start exploring designs and generating new ones. I mean, some people will say that when we're working with Islamic geometric patterns, you're not actually discovering anything new, you're just recreating historical designs. And a lot of people who are studying this actually are just doing that. But also there's also this possibility of actually generating new designs. And this is one approach to doing it. Now, these are some wooden tiles that I designed for an exhibition at the Royal Society in London, which is a kind of like a scientific showcase of research, scientific research, and which happens every year in a central, yes, just this location just near Trafalgar Square. And it has a very, very long tradition. And this year, the year that I did, that I was involved in this project, I was invited to work with a group of mathematicians who were interested in looking at research into mathematical tiling and also its connection to the Islamic tradition. And I designed this interactive piece that could be used at the exhibition where you could work with these individual tile modules to generate different designs. And this is one of the pieces from that exhibition. Let's have a look at the next image. Okay, so this is a time lapse that I've created here. Since the lockdown, I've been doing lots of classes on geometric patterns, and here I'm actually working with exactly that polygonal subgrid of the design from Itimad-ud-Dawla, and I'm showing how it can be built out of those modules and then fitted into a kind of a proportional module. And this proportional module incorporates the golden mean. What I've got here are some golden mean calipers, and I'm using those to demonstrate how you've got this relationship appearing. The smaller to the larger is as the larger to the whole is the formulation of it. But it's this very specific golden mean ratio which appears everywhere within this design. And the ratio is exactly 1 to 1.618. So what we're looking at here are some electron micrographs of a quasi-crystal. This one's actually it's an aluminium copper iron alloy. Now quasi-crystals are they're a type of sort of synthetic alloy. And what's interesting about them is they when they were discovered, they seem to defy the laws of crystallography in that they had what's sometimes referred to as long-range five-fold symmetry. Let's have a look at the next image. And this is here is a typical diffraction diagram of a quasi-crystal. And it's got this five-fold rotational symmetry. Now, there's been a lot of discussion in recent years in mathematical circles and beyond about to what extent did the designers who were working with fivefold symmetries, particularly in Iran in the early medieval period, were they using kind of like proto-quasi-crystal type designs? Because in the West, you don't really find much in the way of fivefold symmetry being used in tiling. Certainly, there are some early examples in the work of Kepler in the 1700s, but there's some very interesting work from the 11th century in Iran. So where they start looking at this, and there's been, as I say, there's been this controversy over the extent to which the Persian designers had anticipated more recent mathematical research. I'm kind of agnostic on that question myself, but I did do some interesting overlays from this diffraction photograph of the kind of classic shapes that one finds within the Persian Gere tradition. Gere refers to the this sort of family of shapes that one finds within Islamic geometric patterns, and more recently has this very close association with fivefold designs. If we can look at the next slide. So this is a typical geometric shape, this bird shape. It appears within the design that we can see in Itimadud Dola and plenty of examples in Iran. Let's look at the next image. There's the Rom here, a Rom which has golden mean proportions. The next image. And this is another golden mean Rom, a narrower one. Those two together can actually generate what's referred to as the Penrose tiling, by the Oxford mathematician Roger Penrose, who discovered non-periodic tilings in the 1970s. And non-periodic tiling simply means one which can extend towards infinity without any regular repetition. Let's go to the next image. And here you have the kite, or I remember I referred to the Farsi name for this shape, the torange. If you take the shorter edge of the shape and relate it to the longer edge, the ratio is 1 to 1.618. It's a golden mean relationship. And this is the kite which is used in Roger Penrose's patterns, and it's also the kite which is used in those traditional Persian designs. Let's have a look at the next image. So you have this inflated star, which again, it's a classic motif. All these motifs appear within these traditional fivefold patterns from Iran. Next one. So here we have the Shamsa, the 10-pointed star, surrounded by those Torange shapes. The next. Pentagon, of course. And the next one. And a ring of pentagons around a decagon. So this is a very common subgrid, and it's often a starting point for reconstructing these designs. And I think those wooden tiles were in exactly this configuration. The tiles, the image that I showed earlier from the Royal Society Shama show. Next image. And this is, I've done this sort of split screen overlay here. This is the quasi-crystal image diffraction diagram on the right with you can see the rhombic shape, you can see the kite and dart shape, and you can see the narrow rhomb there. And on the left, you've got the pattern from the Vakil Mosque here, which has the same family of shapes and just fractalized, broken down into other constituent elements. So there's very clearly an interesting resonance between these two. Let's go to the next image. Yes, so my own research, these are from about 10 years ago. I started becoming interested in what you might call a way of a kind of fusion, where I would take these motifs from traditional Islamic patterns, particularly the Persian tradition, and I would try and combine them with the non-periodic patterns which were discovered by mathematicians like Roger Penrose. And this is a design where I've kind of done a blending of the two. Let's have a look at the next one. And here on the left, you can see the design with the subgrid, which is a Penrose tiling. And on the right, I've taken away the subgrid. So you just see the traditional Islamic motifs, but it's being controlled by a non-periodic tiling. And the next image. So, yeah. So between these two, if we can go back one image, I'll just contrast these. If you look at the bottom there, I show the whole thing is built up out of those two modules. If you look at the center and the bottom, I've just got those two there. It's a kite and a dart. Everything is just generated out of those two modules. And then if you go to the next one, you've got two rhombic shapes, a narrow rhomb and a and a fat ROM, let's call it, both proportioned according to the golden mean, and they generate these designs, one with the subgrid, one without. Let's go to the next image. So this is some tiles that I made again when I was an MA student, quite a while ago now. This is a set of 8 tiles, and this was one of the very first patterns that I analysed, and it's based on a rosette design, a Zilige, Alicatado design from the Alhambra. And you've got a 16-fold rosette here, surrounded by these beautiful 8-fold rosettes. And I've done, these are 8 tiles, so you can see the basic module here. You need to look at it. It's I've got a quarter of the 16-fold rosette at alternate corners, and then 2 complete 8-fold rosettes there. And if you tessellate 8 of them, you get the complete design. So I'm very interested in breaking things down into their minimal units. This was actually one of the very first designs that I analysed, and I've actually been teaching it quite recently as part of these online classes. I think the next image shows a time lapse of that. Yes, so here it is. This is me doing the 16/8, starting with a circle broken down into a square, and I get these proportioning circles which are overlapping. I establish the proportions of the central 8 rosettes. Then I've got the center. We zoom in, and I can start to build the 16. Well, I build the 8-fold rosettes first, and then I integrate it with the 16 in the center there. So we could maybe step back to the previous slide again. So that's just to remind ourselves of where that particular time lapse was going. Okay, so these are also some other tiles that I've done. Again, thinking about this idea of the fundamental module. This is, here I'm using a method where I carve plaster, incise a pattern into plaster, and then I impress clay into it, and then the clay is fired. And here with just 2 simple modules, I can generate a very interesting design based on an isometric layout. If we look at the next image. So it's just those 2 elements, but tessellated together, you can see a different order starts to emerge. So I find it very exciting when you just have just like 1 or 2 elements, but something quite dramatic starts to happen when you start placing those together. It's not just like the same design appearing. There's like a kind of different order that starts to emerge. And particularly here where I've introduced color into the weave, you start to get this different way of traversing the design visually. Let's go to the next image. So when we're analyzing and thinking about these designs, you need to think about what are the building blocks, what are the hidden elements here? And I've given you some sort of insight into those constituent elements. Displayed here are what are often referred to as the Archimedean tilings. They're called Archimedean because they're attributed to Archimedes in a text which was lost from the ancient world. So no one actually has this text. It may have been one of those ones which was destroyed in one of those great conflagrations of one of the ancient libraries. But these modules are said to originate in Archimedes' work. And what's interesting is they appear as hidden subgrids underneath Islamic patterns, and you can often analyze patterns and discover the subgrid. And then when you establish that relationship between the subgrid and the motif, then you can recombine them to generate different designs, as I discussed earlier. And I've used this as a way of actually generating designs for paintings and in other contexts also. If we look at the next image. Yes, so this is another set of tiles from that exhibition. And here you have the tiles so you can see the basic wooden tiles. These have been sort of laser cut, but I've etched a woven motif onto the top, and then these can be reassembled in an infinity of different ways to generate different designs. So this was part of that interactive exhibit that I mentioned. But I actually use this method for generating designs within my own work, within my own contemporary practice. Let's have a look at the next image. Yeah, so yeah, this is another time lapse from some recent teaching where I'm looking at different substitutions, replacing different elements within a design. So there's lots of different ways in which one can one can work with a traditional pattern and then see different ways through substituting different elements that one can generate different designs, which are still what you might call canonical. They still relate back to the historical tradition. So this is just another way in which one can one can work quite creatively with these designs. One's not constrained by the tradition. It actually offers you these this potential for exploration. And yeah, so this is one of my paintings from about 10 years ago, where I've used these Archimedean subgrid modules to generate this design of this rosette opening out into space here, and the subgrid is hidden here. These are just like watercolors, gouache and paint. This is related to more recent work. This is a collage I did based on just 3 quite simple modules, which were actually derived from the pattern from the Umayyad Mosque in Damascus. And here I've created a non-periodic design. So this extends towards infinity without any regular design. Normally when artists work with non-periodic patterns, they're using the 5-fold Penrose designs, but I'm not aware of anyone working that much within this particular family of 12-fold modules. Let's look at the next image. And this is the same family expanded outwards. So it's interesting, this is actually just 3 elements just tessellated together. But you can see as it grows and expands, it's got this sort of wonderful life and flow to it. And yeah, let's have a look at the next one. Yeah, so this is again the same family. So this one's got quite a sort of serpentine quality to it and sort of movement through it. And I like these designs where you can kind of just get lost within them. You can think you're following the order that your eyes continually taken in different ways. And then this is some more recent work, again based on the same family of designs. Yeah, so this is collage pieces. Here I'm actually reusing old paintings. If you go to the next one, I think this is one of the last slides I'm going to show. You can see a close-up here where I've used, this is a collage piece, but I've used opaque and semi-opaque papers and then cutouts of often older patterns and reused designs, and put them together to get this sense of the order kind of manifesting and demanifesting before our eyes. So I'm gonna I wanted to just give an overview of my sort of journey into the patterns, and then just end on how it's impacted upon my own kind of creative work and investigations. But I was going to show, I think we can show some images now from some of the educational work I do. I mentioned the online work, but also one thing which is quite important, and obviously once the whole COVID crisis is over, we can return to this, will be an opportunity to actually teach these designs in context. And alongside my colleague Adam Williamson, under the banner of Art of Islamic Pattern, we've been running study trips to different parts of the Islamic world over the last 10 years. And we've been to several places: Istanbul, Granada. We took a tour to Iran about 3 years ago and taught within the mosques there. We go to Cairo regularly. And another place that we go very regularly is to Morocco. And I'll show, we can just maybe show some, there's a video of one of our recent study trips from about 3 years ago to Morocco, which will give you a flavor of what we do on a study trip. So yes, so I just wanted to show there that yeah, it's good to have the opportunity to study these patterns in context, and that's something that we very much look forward to getting back to do. And as you can see, working with these designs, it's very much a living tradition now. There are many people who've who are studying this work and enjoy coming on these trips. And it's breaking down barriers between different sort of cultures and also different disciplines as well, whether it's the historical, the scientific, and the artistic. Yes, so if you're interested in learning more about these, then do come and follow us at Art of Islamic Pattern. And thank you very much for the opportunity to share these images with you and these thoughts with you this afternoon.
Thank you, Richard, for sharing your rich travel journey to Muslim countries and your interpretation and analysis of the art and science of geometric patterns. We so appreciate you. Thank you. On behalf of the Ismaili Jamaat Khana and Center, thank you, friends of the Ismaili Muslim community, for participating and sharing your time to partake in this journey of art and Islamic pattern. We look forward to seeing you again. Thank you.